plays a critical role in as far as multi-level climate governance for climate change in the country and also globally. So National Treasury for us is one of the key government departments that we feel that they need then to be at the forefront of climate finance. We have a policy of national climate change response, which also positions National Treasury at the center of coordinating and also securing necessary resources in as far as mitigation, but also adaptation responses. And this really needs to be done in order for us as a country to move towards a low carbon and climate resilient society. This policy, what is most crucial about it is that it recognizes the role of National Treasury in them being the pioneers of public finance and them being fundamental in as far as the implementation of climate response in the country. We have, and I think it has been touched upon in the past 2 days, the Carbon Tax Act, which is another instrument, and National Treasury is the custodian of this tax. And we believe that this is a tax that will also assist our government and also the whole country in advancing implementation towards the national determined contribution, which we normally call the NDCs. And national being the actually custodian, we believe that then they need then to be working very closely with ourselves as DFFE in order for us to achieve some of those targets that we have set ourselves, also being assisted, working very closely with the Presidential Climate Commission. One of the critical aspects that I want to highlight in terms of the role of National Treasury, especially now that we are going to be implementing the climate change bill, is the aspects where National Treasury needs then to establish financial mechanism in order to ensure that climate change response, planning, and also developing of mechanisms to resource the various support efforts in the different spheres of government is concerned. One of the critical aspects when we were engaging on the climate change bill was around the capacity, and mainly capacity at local government level. And I think that's one of the critical aspects which really needs to be prioritized and focused on in as far as the National Treasury looking into funding some of these responses. As you are aware that there are a number of climate finance mechanisms, and I think which then are available to us. I think these include your Green Climate Fund, your Adaptation Fund, and also, as I have highlighted, the Loss and Damage Fund. And these aim is mainly for the response policies and response program to be funded. And in this context, we believe that National Treasury must then perform an enabling environment to support the different sectors to access the various financial instruments that are key in terms of ensuring that our climate response is funded. In my view, also critically to this is that we need to have a proactive mainstreaming of climate change imperatives. And that for government to be able to respond, we really need, currently we are very reactive in certain areas in terms of the impact of climate change, but we now need to be very decisive and clear around proactive mainstreaming. in our planning and also in the budgeting tools that we're implementing, of which then we're looking into National Treasury, working together with everyone else in government and also in the private sector in order for us then to respond accordingly. In conclusion, Moderator, we believe that the role of finance in climate resilience is crucial, and National Treasury really needs then to be assisting government in order to look into how we invest and also look at climate resilient urban planning and aspects of agricultural practices, but also infrastructure. And I think infrastructure is quite crucial as a way of ensuring that we are a climate resilient society. And with those few words and reflection, I would want to believe that National Treasury is at the center, and as the various different government stakeholders and departments, we then need to rally and work very closely with National Treasury as they then mainstream climate finance and also our response to climate change. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, DG. I think your presentation will be followed by Zakele to bring the planning and monitoring evaluation spice. Thanks, DG. What I liked about your presentation is that you also offered a solution to tax so that we can fund this initiative. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you, Program Director. Good afternoon, colleagues here. It is very much an honor to me to be here today. But speaking at last, I think is the best thing because everything has been said. I might just say everything has been said and conclude. But for the sake of avoiding fruitless expenditure, DG, I'm going to say something. Since Monday, we have heard from His Majesties from different countries where they've indicated how much money has been allocated and where those monies going to be deployed. And we have heard from the presentation as well in terms of what are the key areas of interventions that needs to be focused on, wherein the issues of infrastructure in different sectors have been laid out, meaning we are now coming to the point of converging our thinking. Now we know. There are things that we know, that money is there. We have heard those commitments on Monday. We have heard from the different speakers during the course of the week saying where are the issues in infrastructure, water, where are they needed. So to me, there are a lot of convergence that we are seeing. Also, we have heard from the banking sector this morning where they were talking about their approach to how those monies are going to be deployed in areas where they are required, which is coordinated exactly at the National Treasury Program Director, as DG has indicated as well. We have heard about the funding approach from Dr. Junaid around MIGA today, in terms of that is still showing how much is going into that pot. Now it remains with the people who are developing the projects and get those projects running. I've provided that background now, but what we know in terms of the just transition, we know that almost 1,480 billion is required for the just transition. We were told by Umhlegazi from PCC, as well as from Joanne. That is what we know. And we're told the money is there to cover that. So now they need to release that money and we get going Treasury. And what we know as well is that we have got the sectoral approach that has been developed by the government departments through the leadership of different governments. And the other thing that we know is that there's a portfolio of catalytic and ready interventions programs or projects, specifically around electricity, electric vehicle, greenhouse gas emission reduction, and cross-cutting areas. Amongst them, it talks about the skills as well as the municipality capacities to build the proper employment or deployment of those programs at the coalface levels. We also know that the regulatory and financial framework is there. DG has confirmed it, Treasury has confirmed it. The governance to run that is also been established and running well so far. We also know that there are coordination mechanisms to synchronize different plans. But the question that has been raised by Jared from PMU, he said there are plans. And the coordination of those plans from his GPT, ChatGPT, whatever, there are plans. Are those plans implemented? How far are they? And how far are they coordinated at different areas? That's the question that is asked by me now to the ChatGPT, to show the ChatGPT that we are above their thinking, and we can say, you told us this, but beyond this, this is what needs to happen. The challenge that we have been having so far is around the implementation of those plans so far. As we know now, the money is there, the governance is there. Now, PESGOM call. I'm not sure that DG can say what I'm saying. PESGOM call. Let's go now and dirty our hands to ensure that we are addressing the just transition, and it's going to be the things of the past after 2063. But where do we start? The Presidential Committee told us that by 2027, we need that so much billions that is required, 1,480 billions that is required, 2027. Commitments we had, can we have them saying tomorrow we are having those monies to start getting into those because we already know what to do. Let's get the money flowing. One of the messages that one can put forward. Besides that, the alignments of plan across the sectors is one of the key areas that we have put forward. But the question we are asking is around now how these plans tend to influence the existing plans, because the issue of climate change and just transition is not something new. It has been there for quite some time. How are we then aligning those? How are we putting them into our approach of master plan, which is our industrial policy development approach? That is now going to be having local, national, as well as the regional footprints. That is now talking to the overall coordination of how we are going to go about doing our work. This is the heart of my slide. When the program director chased me out, if I'm done with this one, it can be good for me. Treasury told us we have been rallying around the CBT. The question we are asking there is to say, or the comments we are saying that CBT should be our rallying point, what the DG has spoken about, by providing a repository of the monies that we are going to have, the programs and the projects that we are going to deal with, and be able to guide us in terms of how we are going to allocate those funds in terms of our key priorities that we have identified as part of the overall just transition response measures. I'm not going to get into what they've mentioned them, your resilience, your adaptation, as they've been mentioned earlier on. But the key areas there, we are saying the issue of national fiscus in terms of the carbon tax that they put forward, the bonds that they come up with, and the output there is to organize the revenue in terms of redirecting them to funding those programs. But at the same time, we are saying the relevance of those in terms of our national priority plans. That is talking to your NDP, your Agenda 2063, the SDG goals, because those are supposed to be providing us with a framework upon which we are developing our thinking. I'm not going to go through each and every one of them, but we have developed that table to respond to each and every one of us who are here and indicating how we anticipate we can pool our resources and our minds together to ensure that we come up with a usable product that is going to respond and provide answers to the issue of just energy challenges or transition thereof. So, having said that, the accountability in terms of what is happening in our own space, we are saying we have cabinet committees. They're having an accountability to design programs and approve them in line with what has been put forward by our partners. We have got portfolio committees that are having oversight. We have got a foresight where the accounting officers of this country are sitting together, looking at those plans, monitoring the progress and implementation of those plans. We've got a network wherein different social partners are coming together, where we have to have our convergence as well as our divergence points ironed out. And those mechanisms need to be given effect and start working onto them and ensure that their mandate is being achieved as they have been established to do so. We have got the Presidential Climate Change Committee and industry associations that are pulling some of our thinkings together. So we believe that the accountabilities can be established there, whilst we're ensuring that everyone knows what they're supposed to do in terms of their roles and responsibilities in just transition area. In terms of planning, that is what the program director directed me to say. The MDTP has put up 3 priority areas that the government of South Africa needs to look at. Those priorities are inclusive growth and job creation. The President has spoken at length about that on Monday. He even came up with the sub-themes that tend to inform that particular area of priority. The issue of capable, ethical, and developmental state is one of those that we need to emphasize on, because it can of no use, or it can be of no use to have all these monies, to have all these plans, if you are not going to have capable people to deliver onto them. The other area that is coming to close that loop is around the maintenance and optimizing of social wage, the social issue, where the just part of the just transition is, and is also talking to say, how are we addressing those areas of infrastructure that we're talking to talk to the social issues on the ground, because they must not be isolated from what are the actual needs of our people on the ground. I believe that the presentation is going to be uploaded. You can engage it with further. So the slides that are coming now here are just unpacking some of the key areas that those priorities are looking at. We are looking at growth that is labor intensive, services based in different areas, be it agriculture, manufacturing, tourism, and implementation of our industrial policy approach or industrial policy plans in the form of the master plans. And we are saying we need to strengthen the industrialization in terms of the key sectors that have been identified. If I can take you back to the first slide, we said that the key sectors that have been identified. One is around your energy. The other one is around GSG and the skills that are associated with it. So we need to say infrastructure is part of those areas. We need to say, how are we ensuring industrialization that is going to anchor or support those areas that we want to see happening going forward. We also put forward the issue of alignment between what is coming out of private and private sector, public and private sector, in terms of looking at the high impact deliverables of the JT. Colleagues from the banking sector this morning spoke about the programmatic approach. That is where we can have that convergence point while having those complementaries in terms of how we are thinking from different strategic points. The issue of innovations and research has been raised, and the capacity of the different spheres of government. In terms of how we're going to monitor this on our side, we have put up that the monitoring should look at providing us with improved implementation on achieving those programs that we set ourselves to do. Starting by looking at what are the outputs that we have given ourselves to look at, what are the outcomes and the impacts of those as we are planning along that long time horizon. Some of us might not be there in 2063, but what we hope to leave for our kids should be mapped up here in terms of how we're going to respond to these issues we are facing. The other area that we have found out to be quite interesting is around having the evidence. We need to have built evidence capabilities to say, in terms of what we are doing as our interventions, we need to build the collage of evidence that are going to prove that we have progressed in whatever that we are doing. Some of the challenges that have been faced by how we have been doing our work is around focusing on whether we performed without tracking the progress on what we have achieved. That has been outlined properly by the professor from VETS on Monday, where he indicated that keeping the climate change below 1.5, there were a lot of interventions, a lot of plans, but here we are sitting at almost 2 degrees because of how we've managed to deal with those. Then what are we going to go about this? It's been unpacked on what we have put forward here. We are saying we need to look at the value chains to say, are we tracking results that is intended to be achieved, rather than just tracking results that are not giving us any mileage. And that is now talking exactly to the thematic area of this session, Program Director. You said moving the needle. How are we moving the needle? By looking at the value chain and the result chain approach to that. Having said that, thank you very much. We can interact with the presentation. It has been provided. That is the end of the key messages that I was having for you this afternoon. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I almost made a mistake of chasing you before you start presenting on monitoring. But thanks very much. Joanne, over to you.
Thanks. Thank you. Can you? Yeah, you can hear me. I think I'm going to talk from here, if that's okay. And I'm going to, in the short time that I've got, try and do a quick walk through the approach to the institutional arrangements that underpin the work that we're doing to implement the Jet Investment Plan. But before I start, I do want to say that I think that we are incredibly fortunate in South Africa. Since 1994, there has been an incredibly strong commitment right across government to address issues related to climate change. And I think that over a very long period of time, we have built a common approach, a capacity, and a system that is underpinned by a very high-level political will in order to be able to ensure that the issues related to climate change are taken absolutely seriously across government. And I think that the ability to hold a conference like this, the ability to set up institutions like the Presidential Climate Commission, the personal interest that the President has taken in this has really meant that South Africa, for South Africa and for South Africans, wanting to and concerned about the impacts of climate change, we've got an incredibly strong base. And so I think that the work that all of us does really needs to be based in a recognition of the power the power and the importance of that. And it's not only in government. I think that it is right across societies, civil society and NGOs, the labor movement, and business. So it is unusual internationally, and I think that that's why it's worth pointing out. So maybe just to talk about the JET IP PMU, we spoke about the plan that we are tasked with implementing and supporting, and essentially it is a cross-governmental, cross-society plan. The JET IP project management unit sits in the project management office in the presidency. And the project management office in the presidency is essentially a facilitation, a coordination, a delivery unit, and a problem-solving unit that has been set up in order to be able to address some of the more challenging and more cross-cutting issues across government. So it sits together with the National Electricity Crisis Committee, the Presidential Youth Employment Initiative, Operation Vulindlela, which is a partnership with National Treasury, and most recently the National Logistics Crisis Committee. And so it's looking at in areas where in order to move forward, you've got to bring together a set of stakeholders and you've got to solve some pretty difficult issues in order to move forward. So that's where we sit. We report into an intergovernmental steering committee that brings together quite a wide set of directors generals responsible who have climate mitigation mainly in their mandate, but it goes a bit broader. For example, the Minister of Higher Education and Training is part of that, or the DG of Higher Education and Training participates in that. There's been a very wide set of functions brought in, and we also have representation from the PCC as well as our development finance institutions. And in relation to the significance of Mpumalanga in the energy transition, the Director General of the Mpumalanga province is represented as well. That intergovernmental steering committee in turn reports into an interministerial committee, and we are waiting for, under the 7th administration, for that IMC to be reconstituted. So that's the kind of, I suppose, an accountability structure going up. Where the rubber hits the road, though, is the work that we are currently doing, and it is set out in the JET IP implementation plan. And the intention there is to take the various elements of that plan and to try and institutionalize them across government and across society. And the way that we are doing it is by, for each one of the different elements of the plan that we spoke about yesterday, is that we are identifying a lead institution to act as a champion. We are capacitating that lead institution with some level of permanent capacity, so setting up a secretariat for that institution, and that institution is then convening a council or a committee of all key stakeholders, including in this instance financiers and lenders, and is setting up a process to work jointly to build the project and the program pipeline that will give life to the JET. So let me give you a couple of examples. In relation to the green hydrogen economy, and there's been a lot of work done by the DTIC and others on green hydrogen, the Industrial Development Corporation has agreed to take on the role of lead institution, and it is taking forward the work of supporting the entrepreneurs and the businesses and the communities that are involved in the development of the green hydrogen economy in the country, and they are bringing them together so that there is one place that allows for sharing of information, for conversation, and for problem solving and the mobilization of finance around the green hydrogen projects that we wish to see in the country. Similarly, with new energy vehicles, it is also the IDC that is taking that forward with a very strong focus, as I said yesterday, on the public transport side, looking at the potential to address some of the intractable problems we face as a country around public transportation through the potential of the electrification of the transportation industry. In relation to skills, it is likely to be the Department of Higher Education and Training and the Human Resource Development Council that will take forward the work. And when it comes to issues such as the work that we are doing around the accelerating the Climate Investment Fund element of this program, we are working in a team, working very intensively in a team together with Eskom, with National Treasury, with the DFFE, with a range of other government departments in order to develop and build the plans that we as a country need to take to the international community in order to be able to mobilize that. So that is the general approach. Now, I mean, I hate the word mainstreaming. You know, we always say, let's mainstream, let's mainstream. What that really means and making it work is difficult. But I do think that unless unless this investment plan is something that is really rooted in the way that we all spend our time and our resources, and unless we are very firmly directed towards the kinds of outcomes that we've agreed on, we aren't really going to move this forward. I think importantly then, on the other side of this, there is a set of coordination mechanisms with our international partners. Some of this is done in the working groups that I've described. Some of it happens through coordination with the International Partners Group, and I think that the UK High Commissioner spoke to the IPG partnership at the cocktail function the other night. So, I mean, you know, I'm describing a set of coordinating mechanisms, but I would want to see them as the vehicle through which we achieve common purpose and consensus as a country. And if I am to comment on the role of National Treasury on this, clearly National Treasury is one of the absolutely central institutions in being able to make the country's climate strategy move forward. I think firstly we need to acknowledge the work the Treasury itself has done over quite a long period of time. And we've been a first mover as a developing country in relation to the development of environmental taxes and climate incentives and taxes, importantly. So I think that work has been critically important. I think the climate budget tagging work is a tool that is going to be absolutely essential, particularly as we start to look at how we work with municipalities around climate change and make the climate outcomes more tangible. I think that in relation to the ability to bring the private sector in behind a country climate agenda, tools like the green climate taxonomy have been absolutely central. So I think it is about taking all of this and being able to pull it together in ways that are agile and flexible and that allow us to move forward together. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Joanne. I think, Mr. Patel, it's your turn now. And thereafter, it's going to be Shamila, the last speaker. Over to you, Mr. Patel.
Does this work? Yes. I'm going to try to be brief. Joanne is laughing at me already. It's very, very important to understand what the genesis of the Presidential Climate Commission was. When the President convened the Presidential Job Summit way back in 2018, the whole issue of a need to be climate responsive as a country, firstly for our own benefit and development, but secondly as part of our global contribution to the decarbonization and emissions reduction journey, to try to keep global warming to as close to 1.5 degrees Celsius as possible. It was at that job summit that Labour raised the issue of the negative impacts of the transition on workers. And the President, very mindful that in this country that has the triple challenge of need for growth, need to create jobs, and reduce poverty, that if we were not going to integrate our climate response with a country-determined set of developmental pathways, our climate response would actually, firstly, be stillborn, but secondly, it would have the potential of leaving masses of people behind. And it is on that premise that just as we reached the period of COVID, the President created, in terms of his own constitutional powers to create commissions, the Presidential Climate Commission, and appointed commissioners who came from a variety of social, economic, and academic sectors of South Africa's society. He also, at that point in time, indicated that the ministers who were key to all of the embedded pathways and programs that were implied in the just transition should also be commissioners. And so for the last 3 years, we've had a Presidential Climate Commission that has been operating in terms of reference by the President, endorsed by Cabinet, in terms of his constitutional powers. And the composition of the Climate Commission, made up of commissioners who came from labor, from civil society, from the NGO sector, from academia and research organizations, as well as young people, faith community, accompanied by 10 key ministers who made up the cluster that was going to be integrally involved in this transition. The first brief that the PCC undertook very early in its inception was, in fact, on a rigorously methodical, analyzed basis, make recommendations to government with respect to what our nationally determined contributions should be into the UNFCCC system, and that was in 2021. Cabinet endorsed that NDC proposal and, in fact, lodged it as the country's commitment to the global climate response by way of that NDC. The second thing the President asked us to do was to enunciate the set of key principles and strategic imperatives that would be paramount in terms of importance, but also non-negotiable as embedded principles and strategic platforms for this transition, which is both climate as well as developmental. And here the Presidential Climate Commission once again went through a methodical analysis of what justice means in the course of the transition. And we came up with 3 elements of justice that were imperatives in the transition. The first one was restorative justice. And restorative justice very quickly relates to the amelioration, or at least the reduction of impact as a result of both climate change and emissions on the country's population, communities, and people. Secondly, we talk about distributive justice. And here, in anticipating that there were both rewards as well as costs associated with the transition, and that there was an imperfection in the market and in the political economic system with respect to the sharing of costs and benefits, distributive justice relates to all members of society, all members or sectors of the economy having their fair share contribution, both with respect to costs and with respect to benefits. Lastly, procedural justice, which is at the heart of the way in which the PCC endeavors to conduct its work. And that is procedural justice, to steal a phrase that has emerged in particular from the Mpumalanga community, nothing about us without us. And what that means is that we have to engage people, firstly, in order to understand what climate impacts might be. Secondly, to understand where the world is going. Thirdly, the imperative to actually have a climate response program. And fourthly, in mitigation, particularly for those communities, localities, and workers who might be negatively impacted to undertake frank conversations around how we can mitigate the negative impacts on those sectors of society. We also do work, and this is where the science comes in 3 areas. One is in mitigation, where we look at what the carbon budget implications are for the commitments that we've made to net zero in 2050, how the trajectory of that decarbonization might look given the structure of our political economy. Secondly, we look at adaptation and resilience, and sadly, adaptation and resilience is a bit behind the work that we've done in mitigation, but it's absolutely critical to start looking at what the impacts on both the economy and society, rural and urban, is going to be as climate actually changes. We are going to face climate changes that we have to be ready for. And in this respect, similar to the JET investment plan that has been developed, the Presidential Climate Commission wishes to undertake similar work to come up with an adaptation and resilience investment plan that gives us a sense of the kind of resources that are required to ensure that our economy and society is resilient to climate change as it unfolds. Thirdly, we look at just transition as well as financing. A lot of the conversations over the last 3 days have centered around financial resources. It is also critical to understand that the fiscus cannot bear the costs of this transition alone. Secondly, we are in a mixed market economy. Thirdly, we are blessed with fairly deep capital and financial markets, and we need to make sure that all of those endowments are brought together in unison to bear. The science that underpins our advice is, and I'm looking to Mark Swilling, whose session I went back because I was not here yesterday, and looked at on YouTube. Science is about empirical evidence. Science is also about objective determination of material conditions, as well as trying to project in a very complex and polycrisis-driven world where South Africa should actually fit in to the global dynamic. And here we would like to think that the PCC takes an empirical view on science, but marries that with the objective conditions that pertain in our own political economy to be able to give advice that is firstly objective, secondly progressive, and thirdly implementable, because it is no use coming up with a wish list contained in recommendations that have no hope of being implementable. And I want to almost end by saying that with the passage of the climate change bill through both houses of parliament in the previous administration, that bill now is on the president's desk for signing, which will make the Presidential Climate Commission no longer just a commission in terms of reference, but in fact a Schedule 3 institution in terms of the Constitution. And so we might say that we have embedded the social compacting process, consensus building process, and the advisory capacity with respect to climate change in the main body of our country's institutional fabric. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I have changed the sequence here so that we start with the .gov.za first. And then for Shamila to show all of us that it can be done in 5 minutes.
I'm testing this podium to make sure that this event has been done in an inclusive way that includes shorter people, and that you give. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much, Chair, for the opportunity to speak to you today. It is a pleasure to be here, and thank you for bearing with us in what is typically termed the graveyard shift. I'm hoping that what you'll hear from me today will give a little bit of energy as to what is possible and the role of business, I think, and the brief today was really about the role of the private sector in climate coordination. I'm going to do this through the lens of the work that the National Business Initiative does, and I also am aware that we might be an entity not known to some of you, so allow me to give the quick introduction. We're an independent voluntary business movement of around 95 to 100 of South Africa's largest companies and multinationals, and some state-owned entities committed to the vision of that thriving society and economy. We work very much at the implementation space of collaborative action for systemic change. And that, I think, is where it's a bit of a differentiator. In its 29th year of existence, the NBI was actually inaugurated by former President Nelson Mandela to support initially the new democratic government at that time. And we are now in, like I said, the 29th year of making a difference. So we work with those members within our grouping, but more importantly, we have worked tirelessly to ensure that we can work across public and private sector, leveraging the private sector expertise, but being able to play that catalytic role in between those two areas to allow us to be able to find a meeting of minds and a space where action can take place. In relation to climate in particular, we know that this presents a serious threat, and I think the fact that this symposium is happening is testament to that fact. And you know, in my previous life, I was the Chief Sustainability Officer at the JSE. It wasn't that long ago, it was last year. I see Vukile over there. But a year ago even, I don't know that we would have envisaged that today would be at the scale at which we have achieved. And I think that that is really testament to where we are. So the other part of that business is meaning that there's the real economy, but then there's also the finance sector and the broad institutional arrangements that need to come together to allow us to act in this coordinated fashion. One of the observations that I've had over the last number of years of working across financial ecosystem and then now more closely with the real economy through the NBI has certainly not been the lack of will. It has been kind of private sector feeling it from different directions, and of course there are some that need to be pulled along, but there are also those that have been leading in that action. And so where do we find that sweet middle spot that allows for all of those things to come together? We've also found that there have been private sector that is taking action anyway because the market pressures are dictating that they have to. And it is facing the extraterritorial implications of regulations coming up in other jurisdictions. The program yesterday has covered some of that through the likes of the CBAM, and just investor pressure in some instances, and civil society, which is seeing increasingly the brunt of what we're seeing as the pressure. There isn't a single big bank in the country who hasn't faced investor pressure at their AGM. This is one manifestation. There are others who have faced shareholder activism as well. And so we're seeing some of those as manifestation in terms of imperative to act. But more than that, we're seeing business already seeing the impact directly on their bottom line, from changing perspectives from customer needs, as well as changing perspectives from investor needs, but also that the fact that that on which they depend, which is the natural environment, is steadily and surely being destroyed. And so business is not going to thrive in a society and environment that is failing. Moving very quickly then into understanding where that comes together. The NBI has engaged business through our climate and energy programs to develop the strong understanding of what the physical and transition climate risks actually look like in relation to climate change. A strong feature of this work has been the Just Transition and Climate Pathways work that built the capacity of businesses and other participating stakeholders to understand the risks and opportunities that need to be unlocked as part of that transition to net zero. If you conceive of the time at which this was undertaken, which started around 2019, and really was developed during a COVID period where people didn't even meet in person, what it wanted to do is understand, firstly, is net zero by 2050 possible for an economy like ours? And if it is possible, what might it take? And so those reports are publicly available on the NBI website. 400 multi-stakeholder process that was undertaken, business, civil society, NGOs, all coming together, government, to actually do the investigation as to what this meant, a number of working groups and 36 CEO champions who championed that work to understand what this might take. To understand the magnitude of that work, I think, is something we need to pause and think about. But needless to say, the outcome said a few things very briefly. Not only is 2050, net zero by 2050 possible, it can also be net jobs positive, should we have the correct enabling framework, policies, and actions that we need to undertake. And some of those have already been covered in the symposium today. The key highlights of that: unlock renewable energy implementation at scale, unlock the expansion and upgrade of grid infrastructure, decarbonize heavy emitting sectors to explore those new opportunities, shift as much road transport to rail and decarbonize passenger rail, enhance the climate resilience of our agriculture-based sectors, and ensure that all of this is done without leaving anybody behind. And I'm not going to belabor the just transition point, which is exactly what this is. How do we do that? How do we secure sustainable job creation, skills development, and reskilling programs to successfully transition and grow South Africa's workforce? If we look at that, that has really informed the next phase of our own strategy as the NBI, but understanding where that focus needs further coordinated action. We need to make sure that business is engaging more deliberately, particularly around the just elements of the transition, and we've encouraged greater collaboration through the different working areas of the NBI in this regard. To answer the question that may be on some of your minds, we work across with other business organizations as well. The differentiator, of course, is that the NBI has always been focused on sustainable development, but has done that to different mechanisms. A key program that we're also undertaking very quickly is that through the JET PMU have been given the endorsement to lead the private sector coordination of JET skilling. Skills are going to be critically important if we are to see through this transition and to be able to bank the opportunity of being able to do this in an inclusive manner that uses the skills we do. We're leveraging the NBI's multi-year program, which has already been established, working with TVET colleges, for example, where we're looking explicitly at youth employment, but also looking at what we're calling demand-led skilling, which means we're skilling for where the economy needs to go to ensure that our people have the opportunity and that we've created the opportunity for access to education in areas that might have been isolated, but at the same time has to be a coordinated approach to ensure that we can have the localization of those value chains to be able to take up the employment opportunity, which is going to deal with some of the issues that Deepak outlined and others have in terms of the three challenges we face in poverty and unemployment, for example, and what is it that we need to do. So firstly, the point is going to be that we have to be coordinated. Private sector is going to have a critical role to play. If you've listened to the numbers in relation to the financing, it is very clear that that financing is not going to come from the international flows alone. We're going to have to ensure that we have access to deep and liquid capital pools of our own country, but at the same time that many of these things we're doing for ourselves. If you look at the numbers again from the Climate Finance Landscape report of the PCC, of the amount of money that has flowed in the last few years, over 80% of that has come from the private sector. And so the fact that the private sector is there and willing and able, I think, is a clear indication. And just imagine how much more catalytic it would be with those one or two tweaks we need to make, both from the economic perspective and the enabling environment policy framework that we need to have. And so we stand ready to work together with government, with civil society, to achieve what I think we believe is a vision that can fundamentally shift an economy that was already in trouble and looking at needing the new ideas prior to even COVID, and that we have seen. And so, Chair, I'm not going to go then through all the other areas in the interest of time, but I'm hoping that that sketches out for us the key areas you want to look at. And I think to just close off on some of the other ones that we really want to look at and that we have started looking at, which is unlocking renewable energy procurement with, for example, local government. The support of the capacitation in relation to the state is an area as well that the NBI has been working very closely with through our TAMDEV program, which has worked with a number of MOUs at different tiers of government to help with that capacitation. And right now, I can safely say that the demand we have far outstrips our ability to keep up, which is a really good sign. And then to also look at, like I said, the value chains and the opportunities we're looking at already there as test cases in the Western Cape, looking at how one can start localizing those value chains, starting to understand and respond to the biodiversity crisis, because we cannot have a climate change and resilience conversation without talking about biodiversity and the need to preserve our natural resources, which are carbon sinks, at least, but also the fact that there's a lot of economic activity directly related to those. And then, of course, developing the capacity of our educational institutions. The NBI certainly stands ready to help with that coordination piece, and thank you for the time today.
Thanks very much, Shamila. It's already over time. I can only take one burning question. Is it burning? Go ahead.
I think you can take a little bit more than one.
More than one?
Yeah, so I think let's start off with 3,
3.
and then see how we keep for time. As long as the questions are quite succinct, then we can get more questions in.
Thanks very much, Program Director.
Can we maybe just have a raise of hands so that we can ask all three at the same time? If you can just say who it's directed to and introduce yourself. So we've got one here, right here at the bottom. Sorry, you'll be number 1. You'll be number 2 right there at the top. Is there any other hand? Is there any other hand? Number 3. There we go. There's 3. Okay, fantastic. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Leanne. I'm from the Centre for Environmental Rights, also part of the Fair Finance Coalition of Southern Africa and the Life After Coal campaign. A huge thank you to the panel. I think from a civil society perspective, really interested in the presentation from the DPME, and so glad that there was so much reflection on coordination. And I think that, one of the key questions that I have is whether there could be a detailed guide on all the different pieces of work that is being held across government. We've heard a lot about this being about combating climate change and addressing climate finance issues as being an all-of-government approach, but it doesn't always seem that all of government is involved. And so from a civil society perspective, as we are involved in also monitoring projects, also tracking different finance flows, it would be so useful to have a good sense of where the different pieces sit, who's holding it, and where key decisions are being made. So that's the first thing, and I hope you can indulge just 2 more points here, is that the issues that you raise around monitoring and also reflection and planning. From a planning perspective, I think everyone is aware that there are very big concerns about the green hydrogen commercialization and the economy. And so is there a space for us to have a really robust, real discussion about the water impacts, the land impacts around green hydrogen as a key priority sector in the JETP? It seems to be moving along despite all of our concerns. And is that within the planning function, where we look at reprioritization or assessments? And the last thing, I think, from a reflection perspective, there are a number of concerns about, let's say, local community trusts under the REAP program. Has there been a full analysis of whether local community trusts have, in fact, given rise to community benefit? Is that something that could fit within the remit of the DPME? Yeah, thank you.
Yes, you may proceed.
Proceed.
You may proceed.
Number 2. Proceed.
Thank you very much. My name is Tebo Matlo. I work for an organization called SALGA. I will start by complaining because we were left behind. I just joined today because I was called by a colleague to look at some of the projects. But nevertheless, we're the same government. You said something, Chairperson, about you started with the gov.za. But here are my few questions that I was writing them down, but also to the previous panel because we didn't get an opportunity to ask. The first one is more on capacity building initiatives that both panels spoke about to support both the just energy transition and the blended finance. What are the key initiatives that we need to work on? Because most of the time it's research, people that are doing in universities, but they don't also feed down to the same municipalities that are being studied on, so that we are able to support these initiatives and the other initiatives. The second one is more on the role of data, because we can talk, but as long as we don't have numbers of who benefited from the SMMEs current today, and they are not here anyway, we left them behind. Because the key thing is, if you want to leave everybody not behind, because they are the beneficiary of the work that we are doing today. So when we have this conversation, it will be proper that we have also civic society organizations that are key to take these issues forward to communities, because that's where things are happening. Everything happens at local government. We can talk about these issues at that level, but when you come to implementation, it happens at local government. The issue that was raised also about political risk in the previous one, I'm sure they are not here, but they are around. What is it that we need to work on? Because the previous one also spoke about the interference of capacity of politicians not to get involved in those projects, which is how we're going to do that. Chair, the last one that I wanted to raise is more on aligning this work with the SDGs. As a country, we are good in complying, but with doing the key issues at local government, most of the departments, DFF, it's at SDG 13 and 14 and 15, but also cross-cut all the SDGs. But when we want to align this work that we are working here, it must start either way around, where we start with what is it that we want to achieve and what impact are we going to meet, so that we are able to respond on that. I think they are now sitting at in New York presenting only 17% of the SDGs are achieved today. And out of all the cities that have reported in South Africa, we have moved from 1 to 10 of the cities. In 2019, it was City of Cape Town. Today, we've got 10 that we have supported to do that. But the challenge is based on how do we align this work at the beginning, not at the end, as part of the M&E. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you so much. We'll take the last one, and unfortunately that will be the last question that we take because we do have DG in the room ready to address us. So let's take that last question. Thank you.
Thank you, Program Director. Thank you very much. I think my question, the first half of my question, very much aligns to the lady that spoke first. I'm still a bit confused about the coordination, so I appreciate your request for some kind of diagram as to where this all sits, and specifically goes to the slide that the DFFE put up, where you showed, certain governance frameworks. And I was just wanting to know, does that slide, and I can point it out to you after the session, allow for some conversation in terms of whether those governance structures are really fit for purpose and whether one doesn't need one or two more entities involved in some of the governance across this? So when we talk about governance as well, I'd also like to know, we always refer to coordination, but ultimately can we also have in the matrix who is accountable? Because I don't see that. And then also with regard to the, the coordination, the gentleman from DFFE also said that one of the key government departments at the forefront of climate finance is National Treasury. But that is quite a loose statement, right? It's still one of the departments. So for me, it's still not clear. I think and with due respect, right, I wrote as clear as mud when the presentation was finished, because for me, it's just not clear. So maybe I need to go and have a look at what was presented. And then just to Joanne, a question. Joanne, you started off by kind of saying or identifying entities that are going to be the coordinating mechanisms. And you talked of IDC hydrogen, you talked of IDC NEVs or HEVs, and then you talked about skills, Department of Higher Education. Then you kind of segued into, and then you've got SIF and a team at National Treasury, ESCOM and government departments working on stuff, but you never addressed where does energy sit? Because energy, you're looking at that one maybe small piece that's aligned to SIF. But where do the broader energy sector issues sit? And, what is that coordinating mechanism that you might have identified, or maybe you haven't identified it yet? Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'll start with the DG. And I think most of the questions are directed to the President and DPME. Over to you, DG.
No, thank you very much, and thank you very much for those questions. And also some of them were also highlighting certain areas that we need to look at as government in terms of consultation and involving stakeholders. I think I'm going to just comment briefly on capacity building, and I think the gentleman up there from SALGA was raising issues around the initiatives of capacity building. I think there's quite a number of initiatives that are there, but from a Department of Forestry and Fisheries perspective, we are looking at working very closely with municipalities in assisting them in putting together their mitigation and adaptation plans, because that's going to be a key requirement in terms of the climate change bill, when it comes into effect, the different sphere of government, but mainly local government, must have those in place, and they must then be discussed and implemented as required. So that is one of the key initiatives which we are going to be prioritizing as soon as the bill comes into effect. Thank you very much.
Thanks. I'll respond. I also want to just address the issue of capacity building. You know, I am quite skeptical. I know there's a lot of money that goes into capacity building. I think the question of what it is generating on the other side is a very big question. And for me, certainly in the work that we've been doing, one of the big gaps is around the need to support in a much more, I suppose, practical and output-related way to support both to support municipalities, to support worker organizations, and to support community organizations to identify and develop their just transition projects and to be able to support them so that those projects get sufficient traction to be able to be fundable. I think for me, we need to be linking capacity building to those kinds of outcomes. And I think that's a critical need in the country. And I think it's one of the things that we would hope that the funding platform that we spoke about yesterday that we are setting up would be able to support. Penny, in relation to your issue, there isn't a lead institution identified for energy. I think there's still going to need to be a conversation with the Ministry of Energy and Electricity, and also a conversation around the extent to which existing institutions such as NECOM and OV might in fact be able to take on some of that work so that you aren't replicating or duplicating. So that isn't resolved. In fact, there's the issue of who's going to lead on municipalities is also not something that's resolved. So that over the next few months is something that we hope that we'd be able to give clarity on. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I was hoping that my DG is going to respond on my behalf, but she decided to throw me under the how train today. So, Leanne, the issue of the coordination of plans, yes, the MDTP provided platform. The PME has been going through a series of engagements, workshops, to see how the plans are coordinated together by different stakeholders from different levels. In terms of whether no one is going to be left behind, those workshops are ensuring that we are ensuring that everyone is part of that, which is in line with the key principles of just transition, the procedural, as Patel has indicated earlier on. Around the coordination is tried to be rallied around a sectoral approach, and those sectoral approach are looking at synergies from different interventions and say how are those synergies are going to be pulled together for effective and relevance of those in terms of the resources allocation, which is going to be aligned to what Treasury is going to assist us going forward. Thank you.
My last word, I suppose, is with respect to capacity building. You know, the PCC, jointly with SALGA, has launched a project for 10 municipalities. But it's not just going to be generalized capacity building, to Joanne's point. It is targeted on specific outcomes. And for these 10 municipalities, we're already underway with having done an assessment of what the key strengths and weaknesses of these municipalities might be. The next phase will be jointly with the PMU to begin to look at, especially from an energy transition planning point of view, which includes distribution as well as local grid infrastructure. How do we capacitate municipalities to develop their own energy transition plans and begin to find ways in which to strengthen their capacity to not only roll out infrastructure projects, not only to do maintenance effectively and properly, but also to look at what opportunities there might be in the market to crowd in private sector financing and projects for energy security in those municipalities.
Okay, thanks very much. This concludes our session. Apologies for working over time, but it was a very interesting session. We managed to keep you awake, but thank you so much.
Indeed, you kept us awake. Thank you very much, Rendani. I love how he comes on and off there. You do the comrades, Rendani. You see? So we have a special guest who's going to close us off today, and I think it's quite befitting that he's going to be doing the closing. It is the Director General from the National Treasury. Of course, this has been brought to us by the National Treasury in partnership with the various donors that we mentioned a little bit earlier on. So please help me welcome to stage Dr. Duncan Pieterse.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm positively surprised by the level of energy that still exists in this room. So it must have been a very good few days. Thank you, Tommy, and good afternoon, everyone. I would have liked to be here from the beginning of the week, but unfortunately I had to spend the last 2 days in Cape Town. We have a small matter of an appropriation bill for this year that has still not been passed, and that we are hoping to pass before the end of the month, so that the spending allocations that have been made to departments can continue. So that's where I was the last few days, but I'm very happy that I was able to make it today, and I was able to follow some of the conversation that happened in the post-lunch session. It is my honor and pleasure to give the closing remarks to the National Treasury Climate Resilience Symposium for this year. It's clear that the symposium has brought together quite diverse voices based on the discussions that have happened today as well, starting with our president earlier this week, and other policymakers, representatives from business, scientists, economists, the youth, community leaders, highlighting both the progress that we've made over the last number of years, as well as the areas that are going to require further attention in our fight against climate change. I think our theme, moving the needle on climate change, underscores the commitment of everyone here to make tangible progress. The theme also suggests a shift from the business as usual approach and underlines a need for urgent reforms that requires innovative approaches to some of the existing policy dilemmas, as well as the way in which we use our fiscal levers. And I'm pleased to see that there's certainly been, in some of the sessions I followed today, a sense of urgency to some of those discussions. Allow me now to share some of the reflections from the symposium as we consider the way forward. The 2024 symposium highlighted the need for innovative approaches to enhance climate resilience. It also expressed the importance of maintaining and further strengthening the link between science and policy making to support an evidence-based policy making approach. One of the key resolutions from the symposium included the need to scale and improve the quality of finance for our just transition, exploring the National Treasury's instruments and policies. Some of the key issues raised included shortcomings in funding for municipalities and state-owned enterprises due to revenue-raising challenges and weak project pipelines. It was noted that international support for South Africa's just transition through the JETP program has been encouraging, but challenges remain, including low levels of grant availability and expectations for sovereign guarantees in support linked to SOEs and municipalities in particular. We will therefore continue to work closely with our development partners to increase the scale of the concessional funding and to make sure that the terms of the funding and the risk appetite of the lenders is in line with the capacity of our municipalities and SOEs. And I think there was a very interesting discussion earlier today about risk allocation and how we think about that as we develop our pipeline. The infrastructure reforms that the National Treasury is currently working on is going to be very important as we work on a comprehensive JET project pipeline that can be linked to concessional funding. Many of you in this room have worked with us on the infrastructure reforms that we plan to announce at the time of the MTBPS later this year. And we've received a lot of support from many of you. I think the previous session touched on some of the very important points in that regard, including pipeline development and visibility, as well as the capacity required to develop that pipeline. The symposium also discussed the macro-fiscal risks associated with climate change, emphasizing the policy interactions between financial sector risk, financial stability, and fiscal policy. To address these risks, our regulatory authorities have developed voluntary guidance relating to disclosure of climate-related risks for banks and insurance companies that need to be embedded in a mandatory regulatory instrument going forward. In addition, appropriate climate-resilient infrastructure investments need to be enabled through regulatory frameworks. This will be reflected in the Conduct of Financial Institutions Bill, also known as the COFI Bill, which we plan to introduce in Parliament later this year. Collectively, we hope these measures will recognize climate risks, promote the internalization of these risks by the financial sector, but also promote the transition of climate-resilient, sustainable assets and businesses. The symposium discussions also highlighted carbon pricing as an apex mitigation policy, contributing to the suite of climate change policy instruments to achieve our nationally determined contributions. The transitional support through the tax-free allowances that are part of the carbon tax provides high emitters the time to transition their operations to cleaner technologies through investments in energy efficiency, renewables, and other low-carbon measures. The presentations also highlighted that carbon pricing is becoming increasingly important globally as more pricing instruments are being introduced in various countries. A credible, well-functioning carbon credit market, which reduces the cost of climate-resilient assets, is being developed. To achieve this, we will publish policy recommendations on enhancing carbon markets shortly. We are also coordinating to align the new Article 6 mechanism under the Paris Agreement. Carbon offsets are a key component of the carbon tax design and have stimulated carbon markets in the country. To provide policy certainty to taxpayers, a discussion paper outlining proposals for the second phase of the carbon tax will be published for public comment and consultation later in the year. We were also fortunate to have received perspectives on the strides made to operationalize the Global Loss and Damage Fund, which is intended to bridge the adaptation finance gap and international commitments to climate change action. The deliberations emphasized the importance of blended finance for mitigation, adaptation, loss and damage, as well as economic diversification. We keenly anticipate the work led by the Department of Forestry and Fisheries in outlining operational modalities for the South African Loss and Damage Fund. We will also work closely with the Presidential Climate Commission on strengthening our climate change response mechanism and funding, as discussed during the course of this week. While deepening finance for disaster response is necessary, so too is getting the basics right. We need to ensure that the delivery of our basic services that reduce the vulnerability of citizens is effective and universal. This requires institutionally and financially resilient municipalities that are investing sufficiently in the maintenance and the building of infrastructure that is also adapted and can mitigate climate impacts. A cornerstone of this effort is the enhancement of our data collection and management capabilities. We must prioritize the creation of a comprehensive national disaster database, which will be instrumental in shaping our risk financing strategies. The symposium also provided an opportunity to profile progress on the climate budget tagging system that is intended to improve transparency on public climate flows. Through various pilots, the National Treasury is simplifying the methodology in preparation for rolling out more broadly across government. At the symposium, we received presentations on the international experiences in institutionalizing climate budget tagging, including reflections on the experiences of cities and metros, while highlighting improvements for future iterations. The discussions on the development of a hybrid climate economy model reflected on the complexities of introducing finance and a damage factor into economic models. The collaboration among modelers and policymakers to develop appropriate models and tools is encouraging, as these play a very important role in sustainable development. And as we know, their value lies in facilitating informed decision-making, highlighting both opportunities and vulnerabilities in the economy as it interacts with climate change impacts. As I conclude, I want to repeat the President's message of the role that the Treasury has to play in South Africa's response to the shocks of climate change, as well as the opportunities to use the just transition as a springboard to build a more inclusive, resilient, and sustainable economy. The President encouraged the symposium to draw on the wisdom of the room over the 3 days of the gathering of minds. As we reflect on the insights of the symposium, it is therefore essential to translate the collective wisdom in this room into action. In the symposium, again and again, we were told of the importance of collaboration. Fortunately, in the last few years, we have developed very effective models for dealing with some of the wicked problems through collaboration. Operation Vulindlela is one example of how collaboration can fast-track policy implementation. The research partnership between the National Treasury, UNU-wide, SARS, and others is another example of how we can collaborate to strengthen the importance of evidence in policymaking. And for this work, we have received a lot of support from many of you in this room, including financial support. NECOM, which was referenced in the previous session, the NLCC and the work of the PMU are further examples of how we are using innovative collaborative mechanisms, including collaborating with the private sector in order to solve some of these complex problems, and we will certainly continue to leverage those mechanisms going forward. This symposium has provided a critical platform for dialogue and learning, and it is only the beginning. We remain committed to wise, informed, and inclusive climate action as a government, and certainly as the National Treasury. Finally, allow me to thank those individuals inside the National Treasury and outside of the Treasury that have worked extremely hard over the last few weeks and months in order to organize this wonderful event and to make it a success, as well as the support of the various donors and all of you who contributed to the event over the last 3 days. We have all of you to thank for making this event a success. Thank you.
So just a few. Can you level me up a bit so I don't shot? Thank you. Thank you. So just a few announcements before we shut off for the day. First and foremost is that we do have a tea break that is organized for all of you just to be comfortable and network and say a decent goodbye to each other before you start driving out and going home. The second thing I'd like to also announce is on the QR codes, the first and the second day's presentations are already loaded. So you just scan it and you go to documents, and then you'll be able to access the presentations there. I want to take the opportunity to thank the front of house. A lot of people are confused. Front of house is usually always at the back. And I'm the one that everybody gets to see, kind of like in marketing. I'm the product. But they do everything for me at the back. And they often never notice, nobody gets to see them. But through that little window is a bunch of humans who are running absolutely everything you see here on stage. Before I call on the most important people in the room, I just want to say I thank you so much. My work as a message architect is not a job. It is a calling. It is a mission in life. And so for you to all trust me to be able to do this on various stages means the absolute world to me. I would have nobody to talk to if you didn't attend these conferences and allow me to complete my life's mission. So for the last time on this stage, my name is Thabeng Kadimeng. It's been an utmost pleasure. We're not formal anymore. But I think it's appropriate to end off this conference with the planning team. There was a bunch of people who planned this. They had sleepless nights. Some of them told us that they only started eating 4 days afterwards. I don't think people understand what it takes to actually plan a conference. From content, to the catering, to the venue hiring, to the microphones, to the little flowers here, to making sure you have water. So everybody in the planning team, please come up on stage so we can clap hands and then we can land this plane. Everybody, all of you, even you guys there at the door, I can see you, come. All of you, come on stage, come on stage. I just want us to acknowledge them and to thank them appropriately. Please come on stage. So the ladies say to me, we're not used to this, I hope you didn't, but it's important that we start to recognize the people. And I don't, it's already hard and very tough to organize an event. Now add a president to it. And then ministers. And then chargé d'affaires. Please, a round of applause, and that brings us to the end. And that officially brings us to the end of the Climate Resilience Symposium brought to us by National Treasury. It's been amazing. Goodbye, everybody.